When heading off on a long-awaited vacation, we want to enjoy it to the fullest, to forget about all our problems and work. Summer, sun, warm sea, an abundance of delicious food and drinks. That is exactly what we usually expect from a vacation on an all-inclusive system. But what if, instead of a pleasant journey and all-inclusive, we find ourselves in a real horror movie that we have to escape from as quickly as possible? What do we do then? Probably, after this video, you will forever change your opinion about the most popular resorts of our time. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. This is Paulina, and you are watching the channel diary of Real Polydor Pam Pam. Here we gossip, discuss, and unravel the real mysteries of this world. Egypt continues to be one of the most popular destinations for tourists all over the world. The mesmerizing underwater world of the Red Sea, the Great Pyramids, and affordable prices guarantee a huge flow of tourists throughout all 12 months of the year. It was exactly this tourist destination that Magdalena Zook chose in 2017 for a romantic trip. Let's get to know the main character a little better. The girl was born and raised in the Polish city of Bogatynia. At the age of 17, she already lived alone, worked a lot, and studied. Her activity was connected with the beauty industry. By the age of 22, Magdalena had opened her own beauty salon. Since 2016, the girl had been living in the Polish city of Wrocław. All her close friends and acquaintances spoke of her as a very kind, open, and positive person. Magdalena met a young man named Marcus, and they immediately realized they were in love with each other. The relationship developed very rapidly, and after only 3 months together, Magdalena decided to give her other half a romantic surprise. She decided to give Marcus a joint trip to Egypt for his birthday. Everyone would love to have a Magdalena like that. On this vacation, they would be able to spend time together, enjoy the bright sun and the sea. It is worth noting that Magdalena borrowed money from her father for this trip. She wanted so badly to make her beloved happy. But alas, when Marcus learned about this surprise, he was not happy at all. The thing was that the validity of Marcus's foreign passport was about to expire. Yes, it was still valid, but according to the new rules introduced by the Egyptian authorities, the document had to remain valid for at least 6 months after the date of departure. There was nothing to be done. Magdalena had been looking forward to this vacation very much and had worked hard to make the trip happen. After discussing the whole situation with Marcus, they jointly decided that the girl would fly to Egypt alone. Late at night, from April 25th to 26th, the girl landed in Hurghada. From the airport, Magda was taken to a hotel in the city of Marsa Alam. The road took only half an hour. It was a good 4-star hotel with several swimming pools and its own beach on the Red Sea. Even on the plane, Magdalena had met a girl who was also going on vacation alone, and what a surprise! She was heading to the very same hotel that Magdalena had chosen. They talked well together. It was clear that the girls had a lot in common, so they decided to keep each other company on this wonderful trip. Upon arrival at the hotel, Magdalena contacted her relatives and said that the flight had gone perfectly. After resting a little, Magdalena began her long-awaited vacation. The whole day she relaxed by the pool. Later, the girl she had met on the plane joined her. They drank wine, chatted cheerfully. Dinner time was approaching when, suddenly, Magdalenovka began to laugh hysterically for absolutely no reason. She started doing strange dances and then ran up to the people around her and asked where her boyfriend Marcus was. By this time, her new acquaintance had already left. She felt uneasy about such behavior. After that, Magda began writing messages to all her close friends and relatives. But the thing is, these messages looked as if her friends and relatives were right there with her. "I lost him. Let's meet at my room. Where are you?" The hotel staff repeatedly tried to escort the girl to her room, but she categorically refused. A little later, she finally went to her room, where she called Marcus and said that some man was walking around in her room. She asked her boyfriend to call the hotel administration and request that someone come and check everything. To somehow calm the girl down, the hotel administration called an employee of the travel agency, a guide named Mahmoud Harry. He knew Polish. Together with the other hotel staff, he somehow managed to calm the girl down and put her to bed. By this time, the worried relatives had already begun looking for someone who could fly to get Magda, but Marcus's foreign passport was not suitable, and her parents simply did not have one, so the search dragged on a bit. The second day of the vacation arrived, and it seemed everything should get better. But no. Magda's condition was getting worse. She ran around the hotel endlessly looking for someone. That same day, Marcus bought her a return ticket on the nearest flight to Poland. She was supposed to board the plane on April 29th. Of course, it is difficult to describe Marcus's state in words. We cannot even imagine how hard it was for him then. Imagine. Your other half is feeling bad in another country, and you cannot do anything or understand what exactly is happening there. A very heavy situation, to say the least. On April 28th, Friday, Magda's condition worsened with every hour. Other vacationers found the girl near her room, lying curled up in a ball. She was shielding herself from the light in every possible way. The girl was somehow put to bed, but she simply remained silent and continued to cover her face with her hands. The hotel staff, led by Guide Mahmoud, contacted the family and showed them these photos. Of course, the whole family was in shock. They became even more frightened and immediately decided to send Magda to the nearest hospital. Guide Mahmoud, who knew Polish, tried in every way to help Magdalena and accompanied her to the hospital. There, the girl behaved surprisingly calmly and waited to be placed. However, the doctors refused to admit her, explaining that they did not deal with mental illnesses. There was nothing to be done. Then Mahmoud decided to take the girl back to the hotel. Saturday, April 29th, the very day Magdalena was supposed to return home to Poland. But airport security refused to let her through because of her inadequate behavior. Once again, Mahmoud came to her rescue. He picked her up from the hotel and drove her back. However, the hotel administration flatly refused to accommodate the problematic tourist. Then the guide decided to drive around neighboring hotels in search of a free room for Magda. During this time, he called Marcus so that he would have video evidence. The conversation lasted about 15 minutes. Now you will see part of the recorded conversation. It sent shivers down my entire body. It is very creepy and incomprehensible. Watch for yourselves.
The recorded Polish conversation plays. Fragments like "Pobede jutro po Maciek tył mi po STA. Ryzent po mi, nie chalew, etc."
After the conversation with Magdalenowka, when she stopped reacting in any way to Marcus's words, Mahmoud again offered to take the girl to the hospital in Port Caleb, about 65 kilometers from their location. There she was finally accepted, and it seemed like a happy ending. Magda was in the hospital where she was supposed to receive proper help. The family was relieved and calm because she was safe. Moreover, the relatives had found a person who would fly to Egypt the very next day to pick her up and take her home. It was Marcus's close friend Maciek, and he was already packing his things and heading to the airport. But of course, if everything had ended so well, I would not be making this video and telling you this horrifying story. After several hours in the hospital, the situation began to escalate again. Magda ran out of her ward, screamed loudly, and pushed away everyone who tried to help her. The hospital administration stopped her, grabbed her by the arms and legs, and returned her to the ward, where they tied her to the bed with bedsheets. These measures were taken after Magda almost jumped out of the window in an attempt to escape. After that, the girl was given sedative medication, but unfortunately it did not work quite as intended. The thing is, the drug they gave her, Metazon, acts as a strong sedative, but in some cases it can only worsen the situation. So in Magda's case, it was clearly not the best decision. Why take such a risk? But by evening the girl calmed down. It seemed the drug had worked. She politely asked the nurse to untie her so she could use the bathroom. The nurse agreed. Once freed, Magda did not hesitate. She ran to the window and jumped from the second floor. She fell onto concrete steps. The injuries were severe, so she was sent to another hospital in Hurghada, which was 300 kilometers away, about 3 to 4 hours by road. The doctor who received Magda there wrote in the report that he had been brought a Polish tourist after a suicide attempt. Meanwhile, Marcus's friend Maciek had already arrived in Egypt and was heading to the hospital in Hurghada to get Magdalena. He learned that Magda had died after several hours in the hospital. After the fall, Magdalena was placed in a medically induced coma, but her condition deteriorated sharply. The doctors began cardiopulmonary resuscitation. The family is in shock. The girl's mother called an ambulance when she learned that her child was no longer alive. This story shocked many people. All Polish media followed the investigation of this terrible case and competed with each other in loud headlines. From the very beginning, the relatives were convinced that Magda had become a victim of a crime. At first, the prosecutor's office also supported this line. In the first month after the incident, the prosecutor's office interrogated more than 200 people, including the girl's family, former partners, people who had flown on vacation with her, the hotel administration, and many others. Her phone, luggage, and laptop were also thoroughly checked. Mahmoud, the very same tourist guide who had helped her throughout her entire stay in Egypt, was subjected to a huge wave of harassment. Many media outlets accused him of having slipped something to Magda and then playing the role of the good guy, but something went wrong. One source even claimed that Mahmoud had done this before, but there was no real evidence. Of course, together with Mahmoud, the hotel owner also fell under suspicion. The investigators also checked Marcus, who also received his share of public blame. Many claimed that he was the one guilty, that he could have remotely controlled the kidnapping of Magda. Later, the prosecutor's office received the results of the autopsy and toxicological examination. They only showed traces of a strong neuroleptic in the girl's blood, but this was logical because such a neuroleptic is used by doctors to treat depression, psychoses, and to stabilize emotional states. The Egyptian authorities most likely wanted to show through this examination that the girl had bipolar disorder and that it had nothing to do with anything criminal. But Magda's relatives themselves organized a trip to Egypt to try to obtain a real report. Someone had drugged her and wanted to kidnap her. Perhaps they failed because she fought back. She had been a mentally and physically healthy person. Magda would never have taken her own life. "I will never believe that," said Anna, Magda's sister. What actually happened there is still unclear, but there are several main and more or less plausible versions of what occurred. According to the first version, Magdalena became a victim of a gang involved in human trafficking. Their scheme is always the same. A planted Egyptian lives in the hotel. He could be a worker or even a vacationer, and it could be either a girl or a man. This planted person most often chooses lone tourists. I think there is no need to explain why. He or she gets to know the victim better, gains their trust, and then, after a few days, offers to have some fun outside the hotel territory, where the abduction takes place. Of course, the planted intermediary was considered to be none other than Mahmoud, the tourist guide. But then why did he help Magda the whole time, call Marcus on video, and show his face everywhere? It simply makes no sense. At the same time, I read somewhere that it was precisely he who helped Magda. Mahmoud did not disappear anywhere. He helped the investigation and answered all phone calls. His boss spoke of him as one of the best employees, and in 4 years of work, not a single complaint had been received about him. The second version, Magda had a mental illness, but no one in the girl's family had any such disorders, nor had anything like this ever been noticed in Magdalena before. All her acquaintances, colleagues, and friends said that Magda had always had a stable and adequate emotional state. Also, for a long time Magdalena had been seeing a psychologist, who likewise had not noted any mental disorders in her. And it is worth noting that visiting a psychologist in the modern world is a completely normal practice for improving quality of life. The third and most plausible version at the moment. Someone slipped Magda a strong banned substance. During the investigation, in May 2019, several news sources published the news that traces of a well-known banned substance in Africa had been found in Magdalena Zook's body. At first, this substance causes euphoria, and then the person begins to behave aggressively. Most likely, Magda was given it on the very first day. Let's recall that same girl she had met on the plane and spent the entire first day of her vacation with. In one of the sources, I managed to find information that this girl could not be questioned. She was simply never found. So it was precisely this girl who could have been that planted tourist who slipped the drug to Magda. The substance could have acted differently than the planted tourist expected, and Magda began to behave strangely and aggressively. That is why this girl ran away while it was still possible. Or maybe it was someone else, another vacationer or hotel staff member. Unfortunately, we will most likely never know. On one of the forums I found a version that, since Magdalena was a sporty girl with a strong and healthy body, her organism most likely began to fight against that very banned substance and produced exactly this kind of behavioral reaction. That is why the kidnapping did not go according to plan. Such a creepy, sad story that is not about all-inclusive. By the way, it somehow reminds me of the story about Lars Mittank. I also made a video about him. If you haven't watched it yet, be sure to check it out. I'll leave the link in the description. And remember, no matter where you are, you can never forget about your own safety. Turkey is associated with warm sea, delicious tea, and mild climate. A state washed by 4 seas, it has amazing nature, and the last thing a vacationer might think about there is that something terrible and irreparable will happen to them. 40-year-old Nadezhda Yurigina was a very kind and bright person. She loved hiking in the fresh air. For her trip, she chose the cozy settlement of Kiris in the suburbs of Kemer. The settlement is very cozy. In 15 minutes, you can reach the city. And so, on December 31st, Nadezhda arrives in Turkey. In the first days, the girl mostly stayed on the territory of the hotel itself, walking around and exploring the area. On the 5th day of her vacation, the tourist disappeared. In the morning, she sent her mother a photo of one of the local trails and wrote that there was not a single soul around and she wanted to take a little walk. Nadezhda also sent a voice message in which she said that everything was fine with her. Everything was excellent. She was walking, the weather was wonderful. However, it was precisely after these messages that the girl disappeared. At first, her parents were not alarmed. After all, she was an adult on vacation. Maybe she had met someone and was just having a good time. The girl was supposed to fly back to her hometown of Kirov on January 8th. But she never checked in for the flight. Then all her relatives began to sound the alarm. Her mother reported her daughter missing to the police and the Russian consulate. Interpol officers from both countries were brought in to search for Nadezhda. The hotel staff opened the room where Nadezhda had been staying. All her things and documents were in their places. On January 9th, large-scale searches began. The girl's close friends also helped a lot. They organized a group of 500 volunteers. The rescuers began combing the surrounding area. They assumed that Yurigina had gone to Olympos Park and further on, where the mountain peaks rise more than 2,000 meters. The trails leading to Mount Chalish were also thoroughly searched. It was one of these trails that Nadezhda had photographed and sent to her parents. Locals said that walks in these places are undesirable because, once you leave the hotel territory, you enter impenetrable forests, mountain ranges, and a complete absence of people around, which creates a far from pleasant atmosphere for a lone tourist. It is very easy to get lost there. Moreover, one must take into account the fact that many wild animals live in the vicinity. There was a version that the girl could have fallen into one of the numerous cliffs on the trails leading to Mount Chalish, and if she had fallen there, the chances of finding her alive were negligible. On the 3rd day of the search, January 11th, Nadezhda's phone was found. It was switched off, but the rescuers did not like this find at all. The thing is, they had already passed through this exact area and this exact spot literally the day before, and the phone had not been there. It felt as if someone had planted it. By this time, the investigation had received new details about the case. First, they obtained footage from the hotel surveillance cameras. On them, it is clearly visible that the girl left the hotel at 10 a.m. At that very moment, she contacted her relatives and reported that she planned to take a short walk around the area and then go to Antalya. That is, she had no plans to visit Mount Chalish or the special trails leading to it. She simply wanted to walk a little. On January 12th, Nadezhda Yurigina's body was found not far from the place where her phone had previously been discovered. Immediately, the most likely version became that both the body and the phone had been planted in that spot. This version, as you understand, arose because the searches had already been conducted in that area by both rescuers and volunteers, yet nothing had been found. A friend of the deceased who had taken part in the searches said that one man who lived right next to the scene of the incident fell under her suspicion. It would have been good if Interpol had checked him, but the investigation already had its first suspect. His name was Nicholas. He was a local guide, and Nadezhda had mentioned him more than once in conversations with her friends. She said they sometimes communicated. Nicholas also took part in the search for the girl, and in general, was the only one who very much wanted these searches to stop. He constantly said that searching in these places was useless and that Nadezhda's body would most likely never be found. Also in favor of this version was the fact that Guide Nicholas knew the area and the trails leading to Mount Chalish very well, and his house, by the way, was located only a few hundred meters from the place where Eurygena's body was found. Tell me, aren't all these facts extremely suspicious? But the investigation did not consider Guide Nicholas a real suspect. There was no evidence except the suspicions of other volunteers and his close place of residence. Or perhaps the police simply did not want to see a criminal undertone in the whole story, because it would have dealt a heavy blow to the tourist flow. It is also worth considering the fact that 2 empty bottles were found together with Nadezhda Eurygena's body. Judging by everything, they had contained alcohol. The investigation assumed that Nadezhda had simply drunk too much, gone for a walk in broad daylight in the morning, and taken 2 bottles of liquor with her. Not strange at all, right? A little later, a version appeared that mountain robbers had attacked the girl. Something like this had already happened in the area earlier, at the foot of Mount Chalish. To this day, there is no official version of what happened, and we can only speculate about what could have occurred. Colleagues of Nadezhda say that at work she was often in a depressed state, often lost in her thoughts. So the version that she decided to end her life in this way cannot be completely ruled out. But personally, it seems to me a strange assumption. There are far too many inconsistencies. Someone turned off the phone. The empty bottles were most likely planted. Nadezhda was a beautiful, smart, well-off girl with good friends and family, and to end her life like that in Turkey in broad daylight sounds at the very least illogical and strange. On forums, they still discuss the version that someone had been following the girl and then attacked her. I also lean toward this version. Most likely, from the very first day someone had been watching Nadezhda, and after she finally left the hotel territory, that someone struck. The Turkish authorities, who naturally did not want to spoil the reputation of the resort town, tried in every possible way to prove that it was Nadezhda herself who was involved in everything. Yet another story about a vacation with all-inclusive that ended very sadly. Well, write your opinion in the comments. What do you think about these 2 stories? I will be very, 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 very interested to learn your opinion. Please, I repeat once again, never forget about your own safety, no matter where you are. I remind you that I run my own Telegram channel where I am in touch with you every day, share something from my personal life, and also show and tell you things that I cannot show or tell here. And that is all for today. Paulina was with you. Have a wonderful morning, day, or evening. Bye-bye.